All right. So, looks like we're live. That's great. Okay, good. Now, I hope, unlike last time, you can hear me properly. And there's nobody even here right now anyway, so I'll give you time to come in and say what's good and bad. So, I've been talking about it for a few months now, but finally I'm going to present my stream on what it means to be anarcho-capitalist, why that's an oxymoron, and why I'm no longer an ancap. The term is ancap. I'm going to be using that term a lot, but of course, this being a live stream, people will be coming in and out. But at least I'm going to say right from the beginning what I'm going to do. Um, Probably almost none of you know this, but I've written a couple of books, and this is one of them. And the reason you probably don't know is because I'm kind of ashamed of them. I don't, um, you know, I really don't like to promote them and brag about them because they're really not um, something I'm proud of. And that's kind of the whole point of today. Um, or not just today, I'm going to be doing this for a few weeks actually, but the point is really um, to show why I'm not an ANCAP anymore and everything that I think is wrong with the ideology. Um, it's it's kind of a long story. I've the story behind this book. You'll see a bit of it as we go through it, because it says in like the introduction and stuff, and I'll be able to talk about it. But the it started around 10 years ago. Sorry, 11 years ago. And I wrote a book over about 12 months and put it out, so 10 years ago, right? And this was kind of the result, but this is this is the second edition, which I did the next year, so 9 years ago. Because even, as soon as I'd finished writing the first edition, I started feeling weird qualms about it and thinking like, oh, maybe, maybe this isn't what I believe or isn't what I should believe. And so even by this second edition, I had started to change it so it was less ANCAP, less like capitalist, and kind of very slowly moved. Because after I wrote this book, I kind of very slowly moved leftward. Like I stayed as an anarchist, stayed on the bottom there, but I kind of went from this ANCAP, I kind of slowly moved to like market anarchist, like from the book Markets Not Capitalism. And you can see, I cite it once or twice in this book, I think. But then kept moving left until I became like a anarchist communist or whatever it is I am now. So that's a couple of things that you could know. My views have taken like most people's, they've taken kind of a weird trajectory. Like 15 years ago, let's say 17 years ago, I graduated university, and I thought, completely differently from what I do now. It took, you know, it took a lot of study after that for me to learn anything worth learning, I would say. Um, but I'm not going to just talk about like all my old views. I'm mostly just talking about being an ANCAP here. Um, so don't worry about all that. You can see right from this first page that it's a little I don't know, arrogant. My beliefs back then were a bit arrogant, and like take a look at what this cover is. you've seen the whole like apes evolving into man, whatever that's called, the evolution of man, that whole thing. This is like thinking like, oh, this is the new idea that's going to save the world, you know? And that's kind of what it is. And it goes to show how little I really understood because the guy's a businessman waving an anarchy flag. Yeah? Isn't that contradictory? I'm pretty sure it is. But, you know, what am I going to do? Just reconciling my past, right? In the first edition, it was like a yellow-black flag. But again, after the first edition, I was like slowly moving away from that, you know? Um, like slowly moving away from the capitalist side of things. And that's and really the reason that I'm not putting that this isn't about my first edition is because the first edition was just so bad. It was that much worse even than this one. Anyway, hey McPuffin. So I wrote this book. This second edition comes from about 9 years ago. I think I finished it about 9 years ago. Um, and and again, as soon as I finished writing it, I was kind of moving away from it. Let's go down a bit. Probably every day, what I'm planning to do is every day write a little, sorry, not write, read a bit of this book and say what's wrong about. I mean, not everything. I don't hate everything about it. Um, some of the things I still probably agree with, but I haven't looked at it for about 9 years. So I'm kind of practicing. I'm here kind of practicing my skills at debunking an ANCAP argument, debunking my own, because I know that I'm coming from a place of good faith, and that I've never, like some people might associate ANCAPs with, say, racism or misogyny or something like that. I was never infected by any of that stuff, fortunately. But there's a thing about ANCAPs is they kind of push all those things to the side. They tend to say like, oh, those things don't really matter that much. And then amazingly, it turns out that they have these racists and misogynists in their movement. So, so Rachel says, would you ever want to make a book again? I've definitely considered it. For now, I'm mostly just focused on the channel, but I would definitely consider writing another book. I just kind of need to think of what it would be about. Like, I don't even know yet. We'll see. I might. Acknowledgement. So this is an interesting way to start. A lot of these things will kind of remind me of certain things about myself. Truth springs from argument among friends. David Hume. A lot of these ideas that I got mostly came from Facebook, right? And I would share them on Facebook, and so of course all my friends and stuff would argue with me, and that meant a lot of refining of my opinion and everything, and of course even things like research, going to look up things. But the problem with this is that both sides of the argument were still lacking a lot, because I was still kind of new to these things, not new to like political issues and stuff. I knew a lot about them, but new to this philosophy. So there was a lot to argue about. Much of this book stems from the conversations I've had with everyone who's made me think over the past years, in particular Jason, Steve, Shirley, Manny, Kevin, Johnny, Sophia, Ayana, Mathieu, Francois, Andrew, and especially my dad. I'll bet none of them are actually watching right now, but if you are, thank you so much for being my friend. I've also learned so much from all those I've discussed these issues with on the Rule of Freedom blog. That's the name of my blog, theruleoffreedom.wordpress.com or whatever. And I wanted to mention, and Facebook page. Yeah, I want to bring these up. Because first, I kind of, when I started all this stuff, when I started getting into ancapism, if you need to call it that. um, what I did was I started the blog, theruleoffreedom.wordpress.com, and so the first 40 or 50 or 60 posts on that blog are like from an ANCAP perspective. So it might turn you off. But what I use it for mostly now is just transcribing all the videos that I make on YouTube. I just transcribe them. That's mostly what it's there for. So, if you didn't want to watch me on YouTube on Saturday in my regular videos, then don't. Just go to the blog. There's a link to each post in each YouTube video. Let's see. This book goes out with love and respect to all those working and living in sovereign communities and other agorists, and all those fighting an oppressive state. I could still stick with that dedication. I think I still agree with that. I mean, maybe not agorists exactly, since agorists tends to be like a different word for anarcho-capitalism, but I don't know, maybe not. They're not exactly the same. So this will give you some idea of the background and where it's all coming from and stuff. Preface to the second edition. See, don't I sound fancy? Don't I sound like a scholar, an intellectual? Not only do I have a preface, it's a preface to the second edition. Ooh, I'm so special. All right. So I wrote the first edition of this book over a year and a half. Okay. I don't even remember that well. While also doing my master's at the American University in Cairo and working. Since that time, I've continually questioned and revised my beliefs. See, that's why I don't think like this anymore. One might call it open-mindedness or lack of conviction. At any rate, it's both a blessing and a curse. Oh, that's right. So this book and blog's Facebook page. So when I was on Facebook for a while, and when I was still an ANCAP, I had a page called The Rule of Freedom. But not only did I get kicked out off Facebook, but years before that I discontinued the page because even though I had changed, all the pages, followers or likers or whatever, were still ANCAPs. So I kind of thought they're not going to change no matter how much I post about anarcho-communism or whatever, so I might as well just give it up. And I did, and I made like 5 other pages. Anyway, they have been instrumental in my thinking because people I will never meet and whose real names I don't know have influenced my thinking in ways they don't realize. Anonymous people online, right? They've influenced my thinking in all kinds of ways. And I've been, like I say, I'm really grateful. I'm so grateful. I've mentioned it other times on this channel, definitely, that it's, there's so much to learn just from people on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and stuff. Like, there's so much that we could learn from them. Because, they're not, as long as you're following the right people, where are we? One result of that questioning is to think perhaps I'm not actually an anarchist. That's because, I think, because I realized I was an ANCAP, and I was like, oh, maybe that's not actually an anarchist. And so one of the results of revising this book and making a second edition is that I changed a lot of the entries that say anarchist to voluntarist. I wonder if you have even heard of that, but I'll go on. I use the word because I like all or most branches of anarchist philosophy, or at least I do now, though I do not fully agree with any of them. The closest I come to any strain of anarchism is voluntarism, because it's not anarchism. Many anarchists, all anarchists probably, do not consider voluntarism anarchism because it considers business, profit, and property legitimate. And that's kind of why it's not anarchist. But all right, let's go on. I believe it is because I believe the non-aggression principle, the NAP, the NAP, we'll get to that. That's part of this book, definitely, is the ideal philosophy of freedom. Oh dear. This book will I mean, you might not see me do this, but I'm doing this, trust me. Lots of face palming. Now, where are we? And fully implemented across the world enables all other types of anarchism. Not really. Not really, because if we still have business, profit, property, and inequality and so on, there's probably, you know, the rich are going to band together. In fact, I mentioned this in my last video. The rich would probably just band together and reconstitute the state. I mean, they're not going to just let, if they don't let go of their wealth, then why are they going to let go of their power? Let's see. A free society would inevitably see various forms of social organization, yeah, few of which quite attain the ideals of the ideologues. God, am I becoming Jordan Peterson? I have also come to believe even more strongly in agorism, okay, as a means of revolution, which is much misunderstood and maligned among anarchists. Yeah, but that's okay. It should be. I encourage anarchists of all kinds to consider my arguments and tell me where they think I go wrong. And actually, I'm glad that I did this part, not in the book exactly, but because having, you know, enough telling me of where I'm wrong, it led me away from that. So it's good. So thank you for telling me how I was wrong. I was almost embarrassed to name Stefan Molyneux as my ideological father, so to speak, because of how others like to beat up on him. So, in the wait, did I put it? No, okay. So, in the preface of the first edition, I pointed out that not only that Stefan was my ideological father, so to speak, but that he was the reason that I became an anarchist in the first place. And I need to explain that, of course, because back, so what happened was I was on Facebook, probably 2009, give or take. And I was on like a libertarian group because I was kind of becoming a libertarian, as in the capitalist sense, the ANCAP sense. And someone wrote like, "Hey, if you're a libertarian, you should try out anarcho-capitalism. Check it out." And so I just went to Wikipedia, and one of the names that came up was Stefan Molyneux. So I read his book, in fact, a couple of his books, like Everyday Anarchy, Practical Anarchy, something like that. Again, this was a long time ago, back before he was clearly fash. Whereas now he's just a total fucking embarrassment to himself. And so, of course, I even then I was kind of embarrassed, but now it's like, it's a total facepalm moment. He's a father only in the sense that he introduced me to a world, philosophies of freedom and morality. That's part of the problem. But freedom, nonetheless, that I proceeded to explore by myself. So it's true in a sense. Like, he's maybe not a great father, but he did kind of put the ideas of like freedom and anarchy into my head. Read one every day? Oh, I don't read one book every day. No, definitely not. But I do read quite a bit. Where are we? Let's see. Yeah, so at least he set me thinking about freedom. See? So I guess give him credit for that. We place too much emphasis on names, because I love this writer and hate that one, and labels, because I'm this and I oppose that. While I employ labels liberally in this book, I know anyone who's read and thought enough about a given subject has nuanced views on it, and keeps adding to those views. Alright, so at least I was kind of on the right track, and you can see why I moved away from anarcho-capitalism, because I was open-minded. Like, if what you care about is freedom, then it helps to look at all the ways that capitalism and even so-called anarcho-capitalism prevents those things. Even if it doesn't seem like it seems like a purely voluntary thing, but even things like customs uh, and norms can be oppressive, and I think ANCAP norms are a good example of that. This edition reflects the changes in my thinking after a year of questioning. I still haven't read anywhere near as much as I'd like to have read, but that just means learning is ongoing. Hey, right? Uh, the purposes of this book outlined in Chapter 1 remain unchanged. So the table of contents will give you some good idea. Of course, we're not going to do all these things today. I'll probably just spend about an hour per day, per weekday, at the same time, 9 o'clock my time till 10 my time, about that much. That's probably what I'll be doing. Is there any way of obtaining this book? That's a great question. Is there a way of obtaining this book? Maybe. You could try Googling it. Let's go back to the title. The Rule of Freedom, the Manifesto of the Sovereign Community. This is all quite embarrassing, but I'm just reconciling with my former self. If you Googled that, you might be able to find a free copy of it. I'm really not sure, to be honest. Not sure if it's possible. Anyway. So, table of contents. Why I'm a voluntarist. Why more people are not voluntarists. This is actually something I've been thinking of doing for anarchism. Again, obviously, I don't believe this stuff anymore, but some of it. I mean, a lot of what it's based on, I still subscribe to. But like morality and the non-aggression principle, I mean, when we get there, you'll see how different I think now. Whereas this, like the problem with democracy, I probably feel the same about most of the same things that I wrote there. We'll see. I don't know. This whole thing on human nature, that's what this is about. The idea of that we need to be forced, and that's why we have government, or the Leviathan. Do you know the Leviathan? If you've read Thomas Hobbes, then you'll know what the Leviathan is. But think of it just as, I don't know, the state. That's about all. Let's see. The difference between government and leadership. I think I did a whole video on this one more recently. Propaganda, of course. I mean, all my videos are about that. And I think I did this too. The fine line between democracy and dictatorship. So I've done a couple of those already. I think probably in my series on my playlist on democracy. I don't remember. What is the state? Definitely did a video on this. Stuff about power and law. I mean, all my videos are kind of about these things now. Taxation and debt. Taxation is theft. Elections and why they're bullshit. Interest groups, bureaucracy, and why you can't reform the system. So I'm guessing a lot of these things in part 2 I'll actually still agree with. I don't really know. Again, it's been like 9 years since I even glanced at this book or any of the blog entries that it's based on. So we'll see. Again, probably think the same on these things too. Security, war related. And actually, if you're looking at all these chapters and like wondering why there are so many, you probably aren't, but oh great, so you found a version of it. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah, the reason that there are so many chapters that I wanted to write so much is because, you know, every time I would say, you know, we should do this, like we should get rid of government or whatever, people would say, but what about this? But what about that? And there were like, you know, dozens of different objections, so I figured, well, why not just make a book that answers all the objections, you know? That was kind of my whole purpose, so that I could send people this book or possibly sell it to them. At first I was trying to sell it. Now I just do it for free. But like maybe to get people to stop asking those questions so that we could get on to the more important questions, the next questions, as it were. And I still kind of feel that way. That's still kind of why I have a YouTube channel in the first place, right? But everything wrong with police, guns, this is mostly just against gun control, I think. Terrorism and airport security, I probably still think exactly the same about that. The war on drugs, immigration, nationalism. I've always been really opposed to things like borders and nationalism and the war on drugs, so that probably doesn't change much. This is about why a democracy going to war doesn't matter. It's not. It doesn't make it better. This is about the costs of war, the monetary costs, the troops and supporting the troops, why we still go to war. And this is a whole thing about Afghanistan that I did because I thought it was a good example of all these things. Oh yeah, and government secrecy, which I think I just needed to squeeze. I just need to like find find which one of these parts to squeeze it into. Part 4, I'm sure I'm going to have all kinds of criticism for, because Part 4 is about the so-called free market, or as a market, anarchists might say freed markets. I don't really believe in markets anymore, so I'm not really going to agree with myself on this stuff at all. But, well, we'll see. Maybe there's some things I still agree with, but a lot of it is just bad takes. A lot of it is bad takes. Like when you know economics, but you've never questioned economics. And if you remember, the title was the Manifesto of the Sovereign Community. So Part 5 is always all about how to be the sovereign community. And it's okay, but it doesn't take a lot of real life examples into account. There aren't a super number of those. So whatever I say here, I can add to it. Even if I could just criticize it, I'm sure I'll be able to add something to it. And I'm sure I won't agree with all of it. Agorism and counter-economics, polycentric law. I think my ideas for the environment are mostly just to privatize it. So, I think we could do a little better. And actually, some of these things I might have criticism for and still not know exactly why. I might not know exactly, what's better, what's a better take on it, but I still might think it still sucks. It's still wrong. Anyway, the idea of Part 5 is like, what do we do about roads? What do we do about education? What do we do about health in the absence of the state? And again, I think Parts 4 and 5, I think those are where my criticism is really going to come out, where it's really going to shine. But we'll see. Let's start by looking at democracy. Okay. Oh, yeah. I forgot I did this. Because there's no page numbers, right? But the chapters are really short, so whatever, who cares? And here's me already invoking a real anarchist to aid me to spread fake anarchism. We anarchists do not want to emancipate the people. We want the people to emancipate themselves, said Malatesta. You probably even know that quote by now, and it's a great quote, and I still believe it. Yeah, Somalia. The reason I touch on Somalia, thanks for that. I didn't even mention it, did I? The reason I touch on Somalia is because people would always bring it up as an example. They would always go, "Oh, so you want this here to be like Somalia?" And so I did a bit of research and realized Somalia, it's not that bad. Don't use it as an example against anarchy. It's pretty good. And I really only read like a little bit on it, so possibly everything I write in that chapter about Somalia is wrong. Possibly, I don't know. I certainly wouldn't write about it nowadays unless it was at least, fact-checked by someone who knew what they were talking about. Now it was just a couple articles I read, so any of it could be wrong. Any of the facts I put in here could be wrong. But we'll see. It's hard to know exactly why we believe what we do because there are so many large and small influences on our opinions and what we choose to read and believe. But it's possible to trace the trajectory of our beliefs. I was always proud of this phrase, the trajectory of our beliefs. First we believe this, then this, then this, then this, then this, then this, then this. I've been studying politics and government for about 10 years now. So that was 10 years ago, so make it 20. My degree is in political science from the University of Victoria, Canada, and I'm currently finished a master's in Middle East politics and revolutions at AUC, the American University in Cairo. And that's when, so that's when I wrote it. It was all in Cairo. And you'll see that a little because there's one or two points where I mention, oh yeah, St. Andrewism is an awesome channel. It's one of my favorites. Oh yeah, definitely. Let's see. Yeah. So you'll see the influence of one or two, like in one or two places of my time in Cairo. It was really interesting for someone who's getting into ideas of freedom and anarchy, because in some ways, I mean, Cairo is anarchy. Like I don't think I touch on it much here. Maybe in the part on free markets, I don't remember. But it's almost like the perfect free market for transportation. Not all transportation, but buses and taxis and stuff. And because they're all over, and they're like all over the place, right? There's tons of them, and they're cheap and that kind of thing. But of course, the result of that is that the operators, the workers, the drivers don't have any money. So it's like, yeah, awesome, this awesome free market that's good for consumers. Well, how good is it for the workers, And it's like one of those questions that I never seem to have, it didn't come up when I was thinking. You know what I mean? I had some vaguely socialist tendencies as an undergraduate. I don't really think that's true. I'd say liberal. And that I don't know how often I use the word socialist to mean anybody to the left of an ANCAP, but, it's a pretty common thing for ANCAPs to say. Like everybody's a socialist. All those people are socialists, and socialism is bad. So, that's the end of the conversation. It's so annoying dealing with people like that. But whatever. After a while, I started believing freedom was more important than forced equality. Let the bad takes roll. The thing about this is that, like I do certainly think that freedom is more important than forced equality, but anarchism doesn't force equality. See, and the thing is that, like, there's no better way to ensure freedom, justice, and equality than with the other two. Like, it's kind of like a triangle in a way. You've got freedom, you've got justice, you've got equality. Like, if you get rid of one of those, then the other two are going to suffer too. That's maybe the simplest way I could put that. Freedom seems to be the best way to achieve equality of opportunity, and access to resources would be more or less equal in such conditions. Well, another suspect phrase, isn't it? I mean, who says? My problem is I'm going too much on theory. This is all theory. Who says that things are like that in the real world? And that's might be why I moved, might be one of the reasons I moved away from being an ANCAP, that, like, that ANCAP theories are kind of narrow, and they, there's too many exceptions, and there's too many assumptions built into them. And this is a great example. Like, first of all, who says equality of opportunity is what we want? How about just equality of access? I mean, it's staring me in the face, staring former Chris in the face right here. Who cares about equality of opportunity? How about equality of access? Once we have that, people will naturally have equality of opportunity. See how I put it? Put the cart before the horse? Let's see. Let's see. Um, I started reading economics. Well, I had already read economics, but I probably started reading it a lot more, and began to believe that the freer the people, the more fairly goods are distributed. Well, I mean, that's kind of true. That's semi-true, but in a capitalist system, none of that kind of thing is assured. By that time, you could have called me a libertarian, but I was still a statist, which means I still believed we needed government or the state, because I hadn't been exposed to other ideas. And actually, that part is pretty key. Even to this day, I think that's one of the reasons that more people aren't anarchists or believe in freedom, because they just haven't considered it. I know it takes more than just that. It takes more than just like, hey, think about this idea. For most people, at least. But it's a good start. I've always figured, in fact, from this book, I figured while I did want people to start thinking like me, to hold the same values, I kind of figured even if it did nothing worse than you know, normalize these ideas and make them and legitimize them in the eyes of like other people, even if they say like, well, I don't believe in anarchism, but I respect what you guys do, or something like that. Like I still stand in solidarity with you, maybe. Like I figured that would be a good outcome too, even if that's all that happens. At least people understand and they agree, or whatever, or understand and stand with us. That's at least the minimum. Good. Let's see. So yeah. Oh yeah. So I kind of explained this to you already, didn't I? One day I was on a Facebook forum for libertarians, and someone wrote something to the effect that libertarians should look into. It was anarcho-capitalism, but again, I think I've excised that word from this book. They should look into voluntarism, and this is just plain wrong. A kind of heretical offshoot of anarchism, or a hybrid of anarchism and classical liberalism. No, 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 no. No, it isn't. It didn't just come from anarchism. It came from classical liberalism. This part is more correct. It came from all that stuff, from that tradition, the tradition of Hume and Mill and Smith and Adam Ferguson, like all the Scottish Enlightenment, really. And they're smart and they've got cool ideas, but they could go a lot further if they had engaged with anarchism, or maybe egoism or something like that. I might have just scoffed, but the next sentence was, scoff if you like, but you can't really call yourself open-minded until you read about other ideas, can you? And I've thought this was an interesting line. Certainly it got me back then, definitely. I was like, Psh, wait, open-minded? Well, I want to be open-minded. So he made a point. All right, good point. You got me. I can't, I can't disagree with that. But I also wonder, again, it could be part of the certain arrogance that I was that I felt. I don't know what's the right word at this time, because who says that they're not open-minded? Like, they might know about these ideas and realize they're bad. I don't know. It just feels like part of this arrogance to me. That made sense to me. I wanted to continue to call myself open-minded. I checked it out on Wikipedia. At the bottom of the page, it listed a few people I could go to for further reading. One of them was a guy named Stefan Molyneux, a name some readers will be familiar with, whether they hate or love him. Well, he's fash, so please hate him. I read Stefan's book, Everyday Anarchy, and every page made sense to me. And hey, that's true. That's true. Um, well, all right, I'll keep reading. I realized that everything he wrote was the logical extension of what I already knew and believed about politics and government. And I mean that's all true, at least to the extent that I was being honest. Um, Remember, I had studied political science for years before all this, and even between my degrees, so about 5 years or 6 years that I spent, between degrees, I was still reading a lot. That's why I became a libertarian. I don't even remember how but I just kind of started reading Reason at some point. I think maybe someone suggested Reason to me. I don't know why. Um, but um, but it all made a lot of sense. And of course, anarcho-capitalism would um, would make sense to me first before anarcho-communism. That makes sense to me looking back, because we've already got norms of things like property, right, and money, um, and just capitalism and business, basically, right? All the things that entails, which we'll get to at some point in this book. Um, those are already normal. All all they were, and since I had read all this stuff about politics, I might not have realized that government was always bad, or realized like its purpose or whatever, and in its history. I certainly hadn't read much about its history, which I have since then. But um, where was I? But yeah, everything just kind of came together. You know, all these things I already thought about how government worked, some history, and then he said, like, actually, we don't need government. And I was like, that's true. And then he said something about democracy, and he's like, democracy's just a farce, and I was like, that's true. um, Nowadays, of course, I could explain it in more detail, but back then it just kind of made sense, fit with the other pieces in the puzzle. I just didn't have the box in front of me to realize what I was looking at. I think I use a lot of metaphors in this book. I came to the conclusion that not only could we be better off without government, government itself is an inherently immoral institution. Well, as someone who's read Stirner, I don't like to talk about morality anymore. It's kind of bullshit. It's kind of bullshit. Morality, I mean, it makes sense to have your personal morality, but to try um, to generalize it so that everyone kind of follows your morality is tough. And even, well, okay, but even if somehow you could, you'd be going around calling things immoral. And I remember a couple of times back then, like arguing with people on Facebook. I would say something, like someone said, "Oh, you shouldn't be allowed to protest or something." And of course, I disagreed with that, so I was like, "That's so immoral." Oh God, I I will probably never ever say that again. Sorry. Okay. Anyway, uh, the next part might make a little more sense though, to me, to present day me. I remember one day in kindergarten, I hit my friend, and my friend started to cry. My teacher asked me, "Why would you hit other people? Would you like it if they hit you?" No, of course not. And that really, it's funny to think, but that really did stick with me. It's funny how that happens. It's like I learned to empathize on that day, sort of. Isn't that weird? Um, since then, I realized something that I think most people can agree on: the initiation of force is immoral. I don't know if we all agree with that exactly, but um, that's the book anyway. Let's see. Let me go back to the comments one sec. Yeah, any books I write in the future. Yeah, yeah, I'd love to write books in the future. We'll see. We'll see. Yeah, Time fades. Yeah. Um, hang on. Yeah. I think you're right about that. Your last comment there, because there seemed to be when I was, I learned it all on Facebook, right? And that and so like you do online, I kind of surrounded myself with people, like-minded people, and and so a lot of them were just always kind of ancaps, and they stayed ancaps for their whole time, and I would come back to them and like, you're still, after 10 years, you're still an ANCAP. All right, sure. But a lot of the people that I was Facebook friends with at that time did start moving left and did become like legitimate anarchists. So it was interesting, some of those people I would unfriend for having terrible right-wing takes, and then a lot of them they became anarchists, like, along with me. They followed kind of the same journey, or not the same journey, but it was on the same kind of path. I don't know. I'm out of metaphors. Let's see. Using force in self-defense is understandable and morally justifiable. Again, back to this word. I think I'm going to use that word a lot. It feels like just rhetoric at this point. Morally justifiable, as long as it's just enough to end the aggression. Yeah, like, don't torture. Initiating force, however, is immoral. Most voluntarists believe what they believe, that government should be replaced with voluntary institutions, because they understand that government is based on force and coercion. That's the most important thing for anyone reading this book to understand. Government is based on violence. Yeah, that's good. I might use that same sentence in any future book I write, because that part's still true. Here's why. Okay. Let's do the taxation is theft thing, shall we? I know. Governments could not exist without taxation. I mean, that's true. Taxation is forcing you to pay for whatever it is the government wants you to do. You have no choice but to pay. If you don't pay, you go to jail. Well, you might. Depends if they catch you. If you resist going to jail, even by walking away, they attack you. I actually added this part into the second edition, I think, because I would have arguments with people and they're like, no, they won't attack you. And I'm like, well, what if you just walk away? You just say no. They will attack you. They can use as much force as they deem necessary, and you can use none without bringing more on yourself. Well, that part's all true about government. That's kind of the basics of how government and the state work. Taxation is a gun pointed at your head. It's funny how all ANCAPs, everything kind of comes down to taxation. And I get why. Because if no one pays their taxes, then the government will collapse. And that's, what everybody on the bottom part of the so-called political compass wants, right? But it doesn't all come down to taxation. If it does, and actually my solutions at the time, when people would ask me, they weren't the greatest of solutions. It was things like stop voting and stop paying taxes. Is that really like how to achieve anarchy? There's way more to it now. And of course I've talked about it, and so have lots of other great channels. But the other thing is that there's never going to reach a point where like no one is paying taxes. It doesn't make any sense. Bosses are always going to pay taxes because, they're going to follow the law. They don't care about your ideals. And if somehow like tax revenues get really low, they need extra money, something like that, then they'll just really empower, the IRS and so on. They'll just like give them more power to take more money from people. It's not really a solution on its own. It's a good idea. Don't pay taxes, but it's not really. It's not a kind of an end. What's the solution? Well, don't pay taxes. Oh, that's it? All right. That's easy. Well, actually, it's not easy now that I think about it. You don't see it, but try defying it. Similarly, you have to do everything the government tells you to, like a bad boss at a job you can't quit. That's called the law. If you don't follow the law, you go to jail, maybe. People who persistently or maliciously hurt others should be restrained somehow. But what about people who don't hurt anyone else with their actions? Are those people criminals? Well, in the government's eyes, still yes. Yeah, I mean, this is still probably all pretty accurate. You can't sell sex to a willing buyer. The government, in its wisdom, has decided you can only have sex if you don't pay for it. As a result, a large part of the sex industry has been driven underground, controlled by criminal syndicates that grow with every woman trafficked, and it's much harder to prevent violence against the women involved. That's one of those things that, I mean, if I knew more about it, I could do a whole thing on it. I don't know much about it, and I didn't do any research to say this kind of sentence, but it's the kind of thing that I just throw into the book without knowing how accurate it is. Where are we? You can't do drugs even though they don't hurt other people. I mean, it's that's self-evident. That is, you can't do those drugs the government has deemed illegal. You can smoke cigarettes, drink alcohol, pop pills as much as you like. If the government made milk illegal, you could go to jail for selling it. It seems inconceivable that such a thing would happen, except, as we'll see, it already has, and farmers are losing their livelihoods over it. This is another one of those things that you hear ANCAPs talking about because it's a restriction of commerce. The U.S. government, in case you didn't know what I'm talking about here, the U.S. government presumably still made, unpasteurized milk, selling, I don't know what the law is, and it might be the states anyway, that selling unpasteurized milk is illegal. Something like that. Maybe selling it across state lines, I don't really know. But the fact is, it is illegal, and in some places, and that was a problem. And again, it's a typical ANCAP thing to say, this thing is restricting commerce, and that's why it's bad. See? Restricting the freedom of people to make money. Is that really the freedom that we're looking for? Well, if you're an ANCAP, yes, that is an important freedom. If you're an ANCAP. Whatever a small clique of decision makers decides, you must follow. They know better than you, and if you think otherwise, you'd better be a fast runner. Yeah, see, some of these I kind of like, my old sentences, but some of them are just silly. Where are we? Yeah. Thus, when I speak about a government in this book, I mean that entity composed of a small number of decision makers that initiates force, and they always say that, initiates force. It's always about initiating force through taxation and law. In Woodrow Wilson's words, organized force. That's from a quote, I don't know if it's super clear, but that's from a quote from Woodrow Wilson, that all government is just organized force. The state is a more complex entity, a web of institutions that the government creates and sustains. It's described in part 2. What do I put here? Sometimes government and state can be used interchangeably, sort of, yeah. Is a school system government, the decision makers, or the state, the institutions that carry out the decisions? Thus, for the purposes of this book, government and state mean the same thing. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I go on forever. I can't explain everything. Though this book is for everyone, it deals primarily with the rich democratic world, particularly the US, because it's seen as the ideal of government by most people who live there, and a wide variety of educated people around the world. And because that's what I study. I mean, like, it could have been about Japan, but I don't know very much about Japan. So it's mostly about the US and the rich so-called democratic world. My intention is not to suggest the democratic world is worse than elsewhere. On the contrary, governance is far worse in most of Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Okay, you didn't have to bring that up, old Chris. The best governments are merely the least bad. I'll demonstrate how and why we're better off without them altogether. I certainly do try to demonstrate that, yeah. Not had the vaccine, guys. Am I in trouble? Maybe. If you don't think government's force, consider this. Thought experiment. I'll give you a second. Is there any law or policy or decision of government you can just opt out of without penalty? There will always be penalties for breaking society's conventions, but conventions are a different kind of rule, yeah. I was thinking of doing a whole video on this, actually, too. It's pretty important, of course, you know, when you're talking about a place where there's no government or law, there needs to be like some kind of accountability and governance. So social convention is kind of more powerful. So it's important. It's still really important. Actually, I have done some videos on that, but one just focused on that would be good. Are there laws? And there are laws that are found in every culture, implying they are inherent in our nature. Well, maybe. Implying. Sounds like a weasel word. And if they're in every culture and they're inherent in our nature, are they good? Are they right? Are they the way things should be? Those are all logical fallacies. But many laws are not based on culture or nature. They're based on the advantages they'll bring to those in government and their allies. This is one of those points where I should be talking about like a ruling class or something like that, the dominant class. The focus for ANCAPs, for all ANCAPs, is on government. Because, I mean, and it makes sense because government empowers people to become the ruling class. So if you got rid of government, that would be like an enormous step toward anarchy, in the right direction, right? But a ruling class is what we're talking about. It's not just government, you know? Anyway. Yeah, this I got from a Family Guy line. Why should we be subject to force to help those who already have the means to help themselves? This is a Family Guy line. I think it was the Young Republicans. We're in the Young Republicans. We help those who already have the means to help themselves. So I stole it. What are you going to do about it? Despite being based on violence, governments could still somehow justify themselves. I mean, people think that they justify themselves by using violence. After all, saving the life of a child playing by the railroad tracks by pulling him away is using force. The question is, would the child thank you for saving his or her life? Well, their life. Let's update a little. If letting a group have power to control people led to favorable outcomes for things that reasonable people in a society could agree upon, such as peace, freedom, justice, and prosperity, the results would justify the force. But it does not. This is one of those lines that I probably wouldn't say it that way nowadays, because as someone as somebody who's taken political science, I know how to argue, and you can really argue this point in, like most points, you can kind of argue from any angle if you wanted to disprove it. If I'm like, the results definitely don't justify the force, well, then you could come along and say, well, yeah, actually they do. And you could give an argument as to why they do. So I probably wouldn't put it this way nowadays. I'd probably say something like, maybe I don't think it does, and here's why. Or, decide for yourself. Like, here's what it does. You decide if you think, it's still good. Maybe. I don't know. But I do word it a little differently every time I make a video. As we shall see, the results of government are rarely what is hoped for. Well, that's for sure. Power is, by definition, unaccountable. And people who are unaccountable can cause all manner of mischief. It's funny to read my old writing. It's sometimes argued that, Despite a few bad laws, the government represents the will of the people. But how could someone represent the diverse opinions of hundreds of thousands or millions of people? If even one person dissents, perhaps because he or she is oppressed by a certain law, the government doesn't represent everyone. Is it right to repress some people if it's the will of some others? Why not allow people to represent themselves? Um, this is one of the kind of basic arguments that you hear as an ANCAP. Maybe in all anarchist thinking, I don't really know, but definitely as an ANCAP because they're always talking about the majority imposing their will on the minority, and it's fair. It's a fair point that there shouldn't be majority rule. It might be democratic in a sense, but that doesn't matter. You're still going to oppress people. Um, it's not a very deep critique, the ANCAP critique, but it's a lot of it is sound. Some of it's sound. So, like, why not allow people to represent themselves? Like, I kind of still believe that. But that's not the point of government. It never has been. The claim that government represents the people is a new phenomenon, a new claim to legitimize its actions. Yeah, that's basically true. Only past couple of 100 years have governments ever even said, hey, we represent the people, we're doing it for the people. Before, they didn't even try, as far as I know. Well, that's not true, because they always had propaganda that they were doing it for the people or whatever, but um, but in a way there was no the people. It was more like they'll indoctrinate you in the religion, and then say, I, the president, represent God, and we're doing this for the religion. It's not for the people, but the people are the religion, so it's the people. It's kind of like, so it's true. They always had some way to legitimize themselves, um, but they're still based on force. The purpose of government is to consolidate power in the hands of a few, so that a small group can control and plunder society as it sees fit. A small group, a ruling class, if you will. Were this not the case, why would force be necessary? Why couldn't they simply govern by suggestion? The competitive party system could not possibly represent all the people because only a few ever win. An election is when people who think their views are right, voters, vie for power in order to impose those views on everyone else. Well, that's not fair. Again, this is what we said as ANCAPs, but somehow it doesn't feel right. This was their way of telling people to stop voting, Shouldn't vote. You're trying to impose your view on everyone else. Well, it's the state doing that. It's always the state doing that. Voters, nowadays, yeah, there are lots of voters who enthusiastically vote for people. They vote for, like, Trump, right? And by the way, people like Trump are, they get elected because they're these demagogues, because they're these big, larger-than-life figures that inspire enough people. It's really hard to win a campaign by being not that guy. By just your thing is just not Trump or something. Now, Joe Biden did it, so it can happen. But nobody really likes Joe Biden, right? Anyway, that's voting. we're gonna get to that anyway. Voting's a person's way of saying he or she knows better than others what's right for everyone that falls under the jurisdiction the elected representatives' policies will cover. Yeah. I hope that's clear. A voluntarist doesn't try to impose their views on anyone. A voluntarist doesn't mind what you do with your money and will not take it away from you by force and call it taxation. A voluntarist will not turn a gun on anyone for smoking some herb that does no harm to anyone else. He only hopes you will give him the same respect. It's funny, even back then I was still my language wasn't that great that way. It was still he, she, that kind of thing. He only hopes you will give him the same respect. I guess it was because, and this book, I mean, it'll show you that um, I didn't get gender, I didn't get racism back then, and white supremacy. Like I mean, in principle, I was always opposed to that kind of, racism and discrimination and so on. I just didn't know anything about it, and I didn't put it into here. And actually, that's a great example of what I mean by like learning things from people on social media. When I was in the ANCAP forums, you don't hear about like people with disabilities or like trans people or racism. Like it barely ever comes up. You're going to hear about how unpasteurized milk is not allowed to be sold across state lines. So it wasn't until I moved to the left and became an anarchist that I was suddenly surrounded by people talking about white supremacy and ableism and trans misogyny and that kind of thing. And then I was like, oh, like these are all really important issues of freedom and authority as well. They're all related issues. I'm going to have to incorporate them all into my thinking. Whereas this book is really just about government. It's only about why government is bad. And since I still agree with that kind of basic premise, I can agree with some of the things in here. But it's missing so much. It's missing all kinds of things that I should have put in it. And if I make another book, definitely will. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. I think that created also a tendency. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, like ancaps don't really get um they don't have the right vocab. They don't have enough vocab. And they don't have a wide enough understanding of all the related issues. And I think this book makes that pretty clear. All right, everyone, it's been about an hour. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to end this stream for today, and we're going to come back tomorrow at the exact same place. And I'm going to talk about all the same things and why I was wrong about everything. So thanks everyone for being here. Great having you, and hope you can come back same time tomorrow. Everybody have a great day. See you soon. All right.